At 7:14 on the morning of my wedding, the venue coordinator called to tell me my reservation didn't exist anymore. I remember staring at my phone, still in my curlers, thinking there had to be some kind of billing error, a double booking glitch, something a 5-minute phone call could fix. "I'm so sorry," the coordinator said, and I could hear in her voice that she genuinely was. "The reservation was canceled 3 weeks ago, rebooked under a different name. I assumed someone in your family had told you. Rebooked under what name?" There was a pause. The kind of pause where someone is deciding whether telling you the truth is going to make their day a lot harder. "Connor Bennett," she said, "for an engagement party. Tonight. My brother's engagement party, my wedding venue, same building, same date, the same $600 an hour ballroom I'd put a $4,000 deposit on. 11 months earlier, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, like he'd been expecting the call. "Dad, my venue is gone. They said it got rebooked for Connor's party." And my father, the man who was supposed to walk me down the aisle in 6 hours, said the sentence I am never, in my entire life, going to forget. "Connor's moment matters more right now, Sarah. Weddings can be rescheduled. Engagements can't." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because we're going to come back to it, because by the end of today, my father was going to learn a very expensive lesson about exactly how wrong he was. Welcome back to Karma Comes Home. Stay till the end, because what happened in the next 14 hours is one of the wildest stories I've ever told on this channel, and my father is still dealing with the fallout of that one sentence. Months later, my name's Sarah, I'm 30, I grew up outside Denver, Colorado, and I'm the oldest of 2 kids, in a family where being the oldest never once translated into being the priority. My brother Connor is 27. He's not a bad person. I want to be fair about that up front, because this story gets complicated later in ways that surprised even me. But Connor has always been the center of gravity in our family. In a way, I stopped questioning around age 10, because questioning it never changed anything. My dad, Gerald, runs a successful commercial real estate firm, built it from nothing. I genuinely respect that about him. But somewhere along the way, he decided Connor was the heir to that legacy, the son who'd take over the company, carry the family name forward, make Gerald Bennett proud, in the specific, visible ways that mattered to him. And I became, without ever being told directly, the daughter who was expected to be supportive, low maintenance, grateful for whatever attention was left over. 2 examples, and then we're moving forward, because you just need enough to understand what happened next, not the whole 20-year history. When I graduated college with honors, my parents took me to a nice dinner, just the 4 of us. When Connor graduated 2 years later, not with honors for the record, my dad rented out a private room at his country club, invited 40 people. When I got engaged to my now husband, Marcus, 18 months ago, my dad's first question was, "So when's Connor doing this?" Not congratulations, not tell me about him. His first instinct was to measure my milestone against my brother's timeline. I let it go. I always let it go. That's honestly the theme of my entire childhood, letting it go, because fighting it never once worked. But here's the thing about a lifetime of letting things go. It doesn't make you immune to the next one. It just means you don't see it coming until it's already happened. And what happened on my wedding morning wasn't just one more thing to let go of. It was the first time my father didn't just overlook me. He actively took something away from me and handed it to Connor instead. I didn't understand the difference between those 2 things until 7:14 a.m. Here's where the timeline starts to matter, so bear with me. Because every detail in this section comes back later, it all connects to exactly why my father made the choice he made. Marcus proposed in April of last year. We got engaged, set a date for the following March, and I spent 11 months planning a wedding at the Ashford Manor, a beautiful, slightly old-fashioned event venue outside Denver. My mother had actually recommended it, because she and my dad had held their own anniversary party there years earlier. I put down a $4,000 non-refundable deposit, myself, from my own savings, because my parents had made it clear early on they'd be contributing modestly to the wedding, a phrase that turned out to mean about $800 toward the flowers. I didn't complain about that either. I was just happy to be planning my wedding. Then, in February, 5 weeks before my wedding date, Connor proposed to his girlfriend Whitney at a Broncos game on the Jumbotron in front of 60,000 people, a whole production. My dad had apparently helped him plan it for months, and almost immediately, my mother started talking about doing something special for Connor and Whitney, an engagement party. A big one. My dad, predictably, wanted it to be a statement, something that would properly introduce Whitney's family, who came from serious money in Denver's business community, to the full weight of the Bennett name. I didn't think much of it at first. Engagement parties happen all the time. I figured they'd pick some random Saturday, book a nice restaurant, move on. I did not know until 7:14 a.m. on my own wedding day that my father had specifically chosen my venue on my wedding date. Because, and I only learned this part later from the venue coordinator herself, the Ashford Manor was the exact venue Whitney's family had been hoping to book for the wedding they assumed was still a year or two away. My dad wanted to beat them to it. He wanted to be the one who secured the good venue first, as a kind of preemptive impressiveness flex toward Whitney's family. He didn't just take my venue by accident, he took it strategically because it happened to be available on a date that worked, and because canceling my wedding cost him nothing personally. The deposit was in my name, not his. My father did the math on that decision, and I came out as the cheaper line item to sacrifice. Let's go back to that morning, because this is the part of the story that actually changes everything, and I want you to feel every hour of it the way I did. After my dad said that sentence, Connor's moment matters more right now. Weddings can be rescheduled. Engagements can't. I did something I'm honestly proud of. Looking back, because in the moment it didn't feel brave, it felt like the only thing left to do. I hung up on him, and then I called my maid of honor, my best friend Jess, who was already at my house, doing hair and makeup with 4 other bridesmaids, and I said the sentence that kicked off the strangest, most chaotic, most beautiful 7 hours of my life. We don't have a venue. We have 7 hours. I am not rescheduling my wedding. 7:40 a.m. Jess's uncle owns a restaurant called Miller's Table, about 20 minutes outside the city, a converted barn property with a big outdoor patio. They sometimes rent it for private events, though they'd never done a full wedding before. Jess called him. He picked up, heard 4 sentences of the situation, and said, "Tell her we're doing this. I'll close the restaurant for the day. Don't worry about the cost right now. We'll figure it out later." 8 a.m. My fiancé Marcus called, and I was crying so hard I could barely get the words out. He said something I will love him for until the day I die. "I don't care if we get married in a parking lot, Sarah. I care that we get married today, to each other, and that your father does not get to decide whether that happens." 8:15 a.m. My other bridesmaid, Priya, is a florist. She left her own half-finished makeup on the bathroom counter, started driving to 3 different flower wholesalers, calling in every favor she had, to reroute my original flower order, which, thank God, hadn't been affected by any of this, to the new location. 10 a.m. We had a location confirmed. Word was already moving. Noon. We had chairs, borrowed from a nearby church, arranged by my future mother-in-law, who apparently made about 15 phone calls in 90 minutes flat. I was standing in Jess's uncle's back office in my wedding dress, while Priya pinned my veil, when my phone buzzed, with a text from a guest group chat. Someone had started that morning to coordinate carpools to the new venue. 61 people had already responded, "We'll be there." Within 2 hours of getting the news, not one person asked why. Not one person suggested rescheduling. 61 people just rearranged their entire Saturday because they didn't want me to get married alone. I had to sit down for a second. When I read that message, 2 p.m., the flowers arrived, exactly as planned, just 20 minutes down the road instead of at the Ashford Manor. 3 p.m., the caterer, who my father had not thought to cancel since he'd only switched the venue, showed up at the new location without missing a beat, because Marcus had called them personally that morning to redirect the delivery. 5 p.m., Jess did my final touch-up makeup in the back office, both of our hands shaking, hers from adrenaline, mine from something closer to disbelief. I remember looking in a cracked mirror, propped against a wine crate, thinking, this is not the bridal suite I planned for 11 months, and somehow it mattered less than I ever thought it would. 6 p.m. We got married at Miller's table, exactly on schedule, under string lights that Jess's uncle's staff put up, in about 4 hours flat, in front of 80 guests, who'd all gotten a group text at 11 a.m. with a new address, and the words, change of venue, still happening, still today, please come. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who is 84 and uses a walker, had her neighbor drive her the extra 20 minutes to the new location without a single complaint. When I saw her being helped out of the car that evening, I actually had to step away from the window for a minute because I realized, maybe for the first time in my life, what it actually felt like to be prioritized by people who loved me. Not everyone made it. A few older relatives on my dad's side, who I suspect were quietly told by my father that the wedding had been postponed, so I didn't show. Some of them still don't fully know what happened that day, but 80 people did show up in a barn on 4 hours' notice. And while all of that was happening, 20 minutes away, my father was giving a toast at Connor's engagement party, standing in the exact venue he'd stolen from me, about to find out that his plan had a hole in it he never saw coming. Here's the part of the story that turns this from chaotic wedding day into something my dad genuinely did not see coming. The Ashford Manor's venue coordinator, her name is Melissa, and I will be grateful to this woman for the rest of my life. She was clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation from the moment my dad first called to make the switch. According to what she told me weeks later, my dad had come in person 3 weeks before my wedding and essentially strong-armed the situation. He offered the venue an additional 20% on top of the original booking fee to prioritize his more urgent event, implied that he had connections that could bring the venue more business down the line, told Melissa's manager that my wedding could easily be moved. We're a flexible family. Melissa didn't have the authority to stop it. She was overruled by her own manager, who saw dollar signs, but she never stopped feeling sick about it, in her words. So that evening, the evening of Connor's engagement party happening at my venue, on my wedding date, Melissa did something my father absolutely did not expect. Connor's engagement party had a guest list of about 120 people, including a decent chunk of Denver's local business and social community, including several people Whitney's family knew from country club and charity circles. At some point during the cocktail hour, while my dad was giving a toast about new beginnings and family legacy, a guest, a friend of Whitney's mother, mentioned to Melissa in passing what a beautiful venue it was, asked if they hosted a lot of weddings here. Melissa, very calmly, said, "We actually had a wedding scheduled here today. The bride's father canceled it 3 weeks ago to book this event instead." That's it. That's all she said. No embellishment, no editorializing. Just the plain, simple truth, offered to exactly one person at exactly the right moment. That one sentence traveled through 120 guests, faster than anything I could have engineered myself. By the time my father finished his toast, there was a very specific, very uncomfortable murmur moving through the room, the kind of murmur that happens when a room full of people realize they're standing inside someone else's canceled wedding, drinking someone else's champagne, at the literal expense of that someone. I wasn't in that room, obviously. I was 20 minutes away, getting married in a converted barn, which, for the record, remains the best day of my life, regardless of everything else in this story. But I've since heard the rest of what happened at that engagement party from 3 separate guests, and it lines up too consistently for me to doubt it. Whitney's mother, a woman named Deborah, who by every account runs her family's social calendar with real precision, pulled my mother aside. About 20 minutes after Melissa's comments started circulating, multiple guests described Deborah as visibly upset. Not dramatic, not a scene, but the specific, controlled upset of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about the family their daughter was marrying into. "Is it true?" Deborah reportedly asked my mother, "that Gerald canceled his own daughter's wedding for this?" My mother, according to my aunt who was standing nearby, didn't have a good answer. She apparently just said, "It's complicated," which, I think we can all agree, is not actually an answer. By the time dessert was served, Several guests had quietly checked their phones. Found photos already circulating from my wedding because, of course, my bridesmaids and a few guests were posting from Miller's table all evening, string lights and all. Put the timeline together themselves. My cousin told me later that at one table, someone actually said out loud, "Wait, this is happening at the same time as Sarah's wedding? Today?" My dad tried to keep the party moving. He gave a second toast, shorter than planned, and according to my brother, his hands were visibly shaking by the end of it, the first time in Connor's entire life he'd ever seen our father look rattled in public. My aunt, seated at a table near the head of the room, described watching my father's face during that second toast as a man realizing in real time that the story he thought he controlled had already left the building. He kept glancing toward the entrance, as if he expected someone to walk in, confirm or deny what everyone was already whispering about. Nobody did. Nobody needed to. The photos from Miller's table were already doing that work for him. Connor pulled my dad aside, sometime around 9 p.m. I don't know exactly what was said, because Connor has never fully told me, but I know it was a real conversation, because Connor called me the next morning, before I'd even opened my eyes, from my wedding night, and said, "Sarah, I didn't know he actually canceled your venue. I thought you guys just picked a different date on your own. I'm so sorry. I would never have let this happen if I'd known." I believe him. This story could easily turn Connor into a villain, and he wasn't one. He was a guy having his engagement party, genuinely unaware that his own father had built it on top of his sister's ruins. Connor later offered to pay me back. The difference between what I'd originally spent at the Ashford Manor and what the scramble at Miller's table ended up costing. An offer I turned down, because by that point, the money genuinely didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered was that my own brother, unprompted, understood exactly how wrong it was, in a way our father still hasn't fully managed. Here's the part of this story that I think makes it a true karma comes home story, and not just a happy ending with a silver lining. My father spent decades building a specific reputation in Denver's business and social community, reliable, powerful, a man whose word meant something. In rooms where deals get made, over golf and charity dinners, that reputation was the entire currency of his professional life. His real estate firm gets a significant amount of business through referrals inside exactly the social circle that was standing in that ballroom the night Melissa said her one sentence. Within about 2 weeks, the story had made its way through that circle, in the specific, damaging way these things travel, among people who all know each other. Not as a scandal, nobody wrote an article about it, but as a very specific kind of reputational erosion, the sort that happens quietly, in conversations my father was never present for, among people deciding whether they still wanted to do business, with a man who'd very publicly prioritized appearances over his own daughter. Whitney's family, I later learned, quietly pulled back from several of the pre-wedding planning conversations already underway for Connor and Whitney's actual wedding, which had been informally scheduled for the following autumn. Deborah reportedly told a mutual friend she needed some time to reconsider how involved the Bennetts should be. In the planning, Connor and Whitney's wedding did eventually happen, but not with the lavish business community guest list my father had originally envisioned. Deborah kept it smaller, quieter, and noticeably didn't invite several of my father's business contacts, who'd been on the original guest list draft. Significant referral relationships that spring, sources of business he'd cultivated for over a decade, among people deciding whether they still wanted to do. The man who'd very publicly prioritized appearances over his own daughter. Whitney's family, I later learned, quietly pulled back from several of the pre-wedding planning conversations already underway for Connor and Whitney's actual wedding, which had been informally scheduled for the following autumn. Deborah reportedly told a mutual friend she needed some time to reconsider how involved the Bennetts should be. In the planning, Connor and Whitney's wedding did eventually happen. I'll get to that. But not with the lavish business community guest list my father had originally envisioned. Deborah kept it smaller, quieter, and noticeably didn't invite several of my father's business contacts, who'd been on the original guest list draft. My father lost 2 significant referral relationships that spring, sources of business he'd cultivated for over a decade, from contacts who, according to a mutual colleague, cited some concerns about Gerald's judgment, Without elaborating further, nobody ever said he canceled his daughter's wedding out loud. In a professional context, they didn't have to. Everyone in that circle already knew. He also lost something smaller, but I think it stung him more than the business did. My father had been up for a position on the board of a local business association. He'd wanted it for years, the kind of role that was as much about status as anything practical. He didn't get it that cycle. A colleague told my aunt secondhand that one board member had simply said, "Let's revisit Gerald next year," in a tone that everyone in the room understood to mean something more than a scheduling issue. My father never apologized to me directly, in a way that felt like it came from real understanding. What I got about a month later was a stiff, formal phone call where he said, "I handled that badly, Sarah. I hope you can move past it." Not, "I'm sorry I canceled your wedding." Not, "I was wrong to say Connor's moment mattered more." Just a vague acknowledgement that something had been handled badly, offered in the exact tone of someone managing a business dispute, not repairing a relationship with his daughter. There's one more piece of fallout I only learned about recently, and it might be my favorite detail in this entire story. The Ashford Manor apparently received several inquiries in the months following Connor's engagement party from people who'd been guests that night, specifically asking whether the venue had a policy against last-minute cancellations like that. Melissa told me their events director ended up adding a much stricter cancellation clause to their standard contract, specifically because of what happened with my father, meaning his one selfish decision permanently changed how that venue does business. With every couple after us, I like to think some future bride, years from now, is protected by a clause that exists. Because of what my father tried to do to me. It's been 8 months since my wedding day. Here's where everyone landed. Marcus and I are happily married, obviously. And honestly, Miller's Table has become something of a legend. In our friend group, Jess's uncle still tells the story of the wedding we pulled off in 7 hours to new customers. He refuses to let us pay him back for the day, no matter how many times we've offered. Connor and I are closer now than we've been in years. I think watching what our father did and watching the consequences land on him genuinely shifted something in how Connor sees our family dynamic. He and Whitney got married in October, in a much smaller ceremony than originally planned. And Connor specifically asked me to be part of the wedding party, which is something our father, notably, was not thrilled about, given everything. My mother and I have talked about that day exactly once, months later, over coffee, where she admitted, quietly, almost like she was embarrassed to say it out loud, that she'd known what my father was doing before it happened and hadn't stopped him. "I told myself it wasn't my place," she said. I told her that not stopping something is still a choice. She didn't argue with me. My relationship with my father is, honestly, the most unresolved part of this whole story. We speak. We're polite. He came to Thanksgiving, but something fundamental broke that morning at 7:14 a.m. And I don't think a stiff phone call about handling things badly is enough to fix it. I've told him I need him to actually say the words, that what he did was wrong, not just badly timed, and so far, he hasn't been able to. I think part of why he can't say it is that saying it would mean admitting, out loud, that he ranked his children, that there was a version of that Saturday morning where he looked at a spreadsheet of costs and social outcomes and decided my wedding was the more expendable line item. I don't think he's ready to hear himself say that sentence, any more than I was ready to hear him say it on the phone that morning. Maybe someday he will be. I've stopped holding my breath for it, but I haven't entirely closed the door either. Melissa, the venue coordinator, reached out to me a few months after the wedding, just to check in, see how everything turned out. I sent her a wedding photo. She told me she thinks about that night a lot, how one honest sentence, said quietly to one guest, ended up mattering more than anything she could have said directly to my father's face. I told her it mattered more than she'll ever know. I also want to mention Priya, the bridesmaid who spent her own wedding morning makeup time, driving between flower wholesalers instead. 6 months later, when she got engaged herself, I told her whatever venue she wanted, whatever it cost. I was covering it personally, no questions asked. She cried on the phone. I told her that's just what family is actually supposed to look like. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Karma doesn't always need you to fight for it. Sometimes it just needs one honest person in the right room at the right moment, refusing to pretend everything's fine. My father thought he could quietly move my wedding out of the way, absorb the $4,000 loss like it was nothing, let the story disappear into a footnote nobody outside our family would ever know about. He didn't count on a venue coordinator with a conscience. He didn't count on 80 guests getting a text at 11 a.m. and showing up anyway, and he definitely didn't count on the fact that the exact social circle he was trying to impress that night was the same circle that would quietly, permanently reconsider what kind of man he actually was. That's karma coming home. Not loud, not a single dramatic confrontation, just the truth, traveling through a room. One honest sentence at a time, and a father learning, months later, that some things really can't be rescheduled. After all, if this story hit you the way I think it did, tell me in the comments. Would you have found a way to get married that same day, or would you have waited? And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because next week I'm telling you what happened at Connor and Whitney's actual wedding. And trust me, my father was not the only person who learned a lesson that year. Until next time, I'm signing off from Karma Comes Home. See you soon.